Hello and welcome to this week's lesson where we will talk about the basic principles behind communication and public speaking, starting with the definition of communication itself. So what is communication? I want you to think about that term from your own point of view. What does that mean? So we can compare whatever your definition was with a more formal definition that comes from Peter Marston, which is that communication is a transactional process where two or more individuals exchange information through the assignment of meaning. And we'll break that down. In that, number one, it's a transaction. There's a give and take, much like when you make a purchase. It's also a process. It's continual. It's ongoing. What happens at the beginning shapes what occurs later on. Communication may occur in the form of a dialogue between two people or in mass media to unlimited amounts of the public. There's some kind of exchange of information through speech, through images, visuals, through your appearance, gestures. All of that contains information, which we then put some meaning towards. And of course, different people may take different meanings from different pieces of information. And so that's kind of a more complex way of looking at it. But essentially, it's the exchange of ideas and information. When we're talking to people, we're communicating. Even when we're not talking, we're gesturing. We're judging each other's appearance. We can, exchange information through a visual aid, like on this slide here. So it's important to know, in essence, what communication is, since this is the basic communication course. Moving on then, let's look at the communication process and elaborate a little bit more. It involves a sender, a channel, and a receiver. So the sender is the source of the information. The channel is the medium. So in this case, it would be online through video, or it might be in person, or through email. Those are different channels. And then there would be a receiver on the other side of that. And the process involves a source, a message, a receiver, and feedback. So let's say in this example, I'm talking about the definition of communication. That's the source. That's the message. I might be the source, and you all would be on the receiving end of that. And right now, I'm not getting any real-time feedback, which is one of the challenges with online communication, because I'm not presenting to a live audience. But I might get feedback later on through questions, comments, through assessing some of the assignments that you all are going to submit, and that's going to be my way of getting feedback. Typically, in a public speaking setting, you'd have the audience right in front of you, and you'd see their nonverbals, their gestures, their response to your message. And that speaks to the feedback that you're getting. And then you will adjust the message. So it's an ongoing process. And you're all providing, and in an audience, you all would be providing information as well through your nonverbal, through how you're responding to the message as well. So both sides, the audience and the speaker, has information that is being shared. One thing I'd like to address in this class in particular, since it is the required course, it's mandatory for most folks, rather than being an elective unit that a lot of people, rush to sign up for. Some people put off taking this class. They are apprehensive about the subject, but it is required. And I want to take a moment to highlight why that's the case. So why bother taking this class? Why should we care about public speaking? My assertion, my argument is that it's going to matter in several key areas. Number one, job interviews and your future professional career will hinge upon your ability to interact with your colleagues, customers, superiors, etc. A job interview is a very pivotal moment when your communication skills are put on display, and that's a large purpose of the interview itself. Because otherwise, why have an interview when they know your qualifications from a resume or a CV? That all should explain why you're capable or qualified for the position. But no, the job interview often has a major, if not a more significant role than all of those other factors. And that's because of communication, because people want to know how good you are at being able to portray your ideas effectively. So professionally, academically as well, it's very likely that you'll have presentations in other classes. Even in this online format, I would guess that many of you might have presentations due this semester, and certainly outside of online education, there will be many presentations involved in that, which is why this class is essential. And then finally, interpersonally, it's important to have basic communication skills to be able to express ourselves clearly and confidently. You may have situations where you actually have to give a speech in your personal life, maybe a wedding speech, or in the terrible event that there's a loss and you have to speak at the funeral in the form of a eulogy. There's many different possibilities for you to have an actual formal speech outside of work and school. It's just important for confidence building as well. In all, I would say that, and I challenge you to think about any areas where this might not be true, because I'd argue that it's true in pretty much all across the board, that the better your communication skills, the more opportunities for success in life that you'll have in all areas, professionally, academically, interpersonally, the more opportunities that you'll get, and the more possibility for success, whether it's financial success, success in your courses, in your life, interpersonally as well. Think about some of the most influential, powerful, wealthy people in society today, and there's a strong, I would say pretty much unanimously, that they would have strong communication skills in some form. Of course, what gets in the way of many people sharing their ideas clearly and taking a class like this is the nerves that goes along with that. So that's a really major subject that I want to get into further. And I have some quotes here that we can attribute to a noteworthy individual that you might recognize. And just for fun, I kind of want you to see if you can guess who is the source of this quote. And the point being, my point in doing this is that you might be surprised how many influential people in society have also experienced some form of performance anxiety. An influential person once said, "I was terrified of public speaking in high school and college. I couldn't do it. I would throw up and everything." Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people in the world, who is widely known as being a very personable, strong communicator, he said this, and he's actually spoken about a certificate that he got from completing a public speaking course being more valuable to him than his college degree. And he's talked a lot about the importance of communication skills. Here's another person who said, "I think the audience knew what was happening. It was a play. They bought tickets. I'm up there acting and I can't talk." You may be surprised to know this comes from one of the most widely known performers and perhaps the most famous voices ever, James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader, Mufasa, an incredible actor and performer. He talked in an interview about, on his first Broadway performance, getting a stage fright and freezing on the stage. I was surprised to learn that about him, since he's such an incredible performer. The stage fright, I think, is what puts the edge, I think, on a performance. Betty White, a lifelong performer, I was surprised to learn, after all of her years in front of the cameras and in front of audiences, she went on a talk show some years ago, and she came out and the host asked her, because the audience roared with applause, and they said, "You must love all this attention that you get." And Betty White replied, after all these years, I still get stage fright. I was really shocked by that because you'd think somebody with so much experience would have overcome that, or the anxiety would have melted away. And yet she's had this incredible career and has been such an incredible performer and an influential person, despite any kind of, apprehensions that might have been there. And here are some historical examples. My vision became blurred and I trembled, though the speech hardly covered a sheet of foolscap, which I had to Google. That means just a sheet of paper. Said by Gandhi. During the whole time I sat with him in Congress, I never heard him utter 3 sentences together. John Adams said this about the third president, Thomas Jefferson. And finally, there are 2 kinds of speakers, those who are nervous and those who are liars. Mark Twain made that quote, which is very just concise and implies that most people have some kind of apprehensions about speaking in front of a large audience. It's normal. It's natural. Many of you might be experiencing that, but that's okay. Don't feel like, you're the only one. Of course, some people might have more nerves than others. That's to be expected. Of course, some of us might have, crippling kind of social anxiety or panic disorder that really interferes with our ability to communicate and interact with other people. So that's a whole different issue, which, I don't want to minimize. But nonetheless, being nervous about public speaking is quite normal. It's helpful to think about what's behind this anxiety. Why does it feel so nerve-wracking, and why are so many people apprehensive about addressing a crowd when it's so, seemingly harmless? The fight or flight response is responsible for this. We have, our sympathetic part of our nervous system that activates the adrenaline, all those chemical signals that cause us to sweat, blush, get shaky. You might have other symptoms, maybe whatever it might be. Blanking out is certainly a symptom. In fact, there was a piece from a book by Robert Sapolsky. A book was called Behave, and he recounts a study showing that people put in a situation to give an impromptu presentation showed brain changes, so brain activity went away from parts of the brain that mimicked people who had severe brain damage to that part of their brains from like a car accident. So the nerves from public speaking, if we are to, extrapolate this example, can cause us to feel like totally at a loss for words, as if, we had a serious brain issue, even though, of course, it's just a temporary, brief phenomenon instigated by, this kind of a response. So it's very normal. It's very common. If you're up there presenting and you're feeling this overwhelming sense of anxiety, it's just the chemical signals running through your body. It's normal. It's natural. We're human beings. We care about what other people think about us. It's how we evolved. And that's why we have such a strong reaction to how we come across to other people. My other theory is that it's even more pronounced just when we're younger as well. Many of us might be starting school and that at a younger age and having had less experiences interacting and being able to, increase our confidence. That just might be a part of it as well. It's also important to understand the flip side of the sympathetic part of our nervous system, the fight or flight response, with the other side, the parasympathetic division that helps us to rest, to calm down, breathing deeply. Things like that are an important way to mitigate some of those anxiety symptoms, and paying attention to your, how you're treating yourself and your body outside of presentations can be an important part to leveling yourself out for the presentation. To try to keep it simple, to just something that you can you might be able to remember, I like to think about 3 P's. So number 1 is being present. Breathing deeply, trying to center yourself in your thoughts and quieting down all that mental chatter. So slowing down, focusing on what's happening around you. That's why, I strongly recommend things like visualizations, relaxation exercises, meditations, anything that gets you to calm down and in the moment. So being present. Posture. Having strong, confident posture displays that you're confident to the audience and also to yourself that you are ready for that event as well. So as opposed to being too hunched over. Amy Cuddy has a compelling TED Talk called Your Body Language Shapes Who You Are. I recommend that to any folks interested, and that elaborates on the importance of your posture and how that can shape your feelings about yourself and your performance. So presence, posture, and most importantly perhaps is preparation. So the more rehearsed you are, the more you know your subject, the easier it will be to share in front of an audience. You might think about what it feels like to go and do an exam when you haven't studied at all and you're, panicking when you sit down and you get out the Scantron. It's a similar thing if you get up to present and you have no preparation, you're going to panic. As opposed to being prepared, having all the tools necessary to complete a speech successfully can leave you feeling much more confident going into that. I hope those little tips help to just think about ways that you can minimize the anxiety and increase confidence levels. Which leads to the importance of having ethics in speech, because this is a public speaking class and you have a voice where you're going to be amplified in front of an audience of your peers. It's important to have some considerations in mind given that. A fantastic quote that's often been attributed to several people, but the most accurate source I could find is here. So it goes, they may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. It might not always be the words you say, but the intention behind it that ultimately matters in the end. So it's important to have goodwill towards the audience, to have their best interests in mind, and to seek to contribute something positive to public discourse, instead of picking topics at random or for selfish reasons. So you can demonstrate ethical speech in these ways. By being prepared. In this class, we're forced to watch your speeches, so please don't waste our time with presentations that are not as prepared as could be. Being transparent, honest in your facts and all of your information, and again, having that respect for your audience and seeking to contribute something positive. In order to maintain a positive, constructive atmosphere, I'll ask us to refrain from, offensive remarks. Again, any kind of commentary that is not productive, that is not constructive in building up the audience, let's avoid. So that's how we can gain a stronger connection together as a class. I'll also encourage you, not just for the sake of this class, but outside of this class, you'll find it's really important to learn to speak with a sense of inclusivity in a professional setting, in a job interview. If you have to give a business presentation or pitch, you'll find many instances and occasions where your words are, carefully evaluated. And I wouldn't want you to, miss out on any opportunities because you aren't, because you're speaking in a way that excludes certain people. Number one, just speak, with kindness and compassion in a way that, seeks to elevate all people. When you're selecting topics, the information that you include, examples, try to incorporate as much, diversity and variety as possible. When you do that, that's a way we can be more inclusive instead of just focusing on, maybe whatever group we're accustomed to. And finally, using gender neutral terms. So I've got some examples in this next slide here. And when I say this, Is this a hard, fast rule that we have to follow or I'll take off points? No. This is a public speaking class, and I'm trying to prepare you for other settings you might be, evaluated in academically, professionally, and beyond. And these are important considerations. I wouldn't want you to be misunderstood. So this is just something kind of that we can try for fun here. And some of these are more obvious and some of them are a little bit more obscure. And I just wanted to challenge us to think about gender neutral alternatives for some of these words and terms here. So let's see what kind of alternatives might we have for these words. Is this something I'm going to mark you down for? No. Is this something that everybody might, find incredibly offensive and important? Not necessarily. It depends. But if we're aiming to become stronger public speakers and to have a greater impact on our audience and to expand our reach, then I challenge us to do the best that we can with being more inclusive. So I've got chairman, fireman, manpower, freshman, man-made, penmanship. What are some alternatives? Well, chair or chairperson, firefighter, manpower, human effort. Instead of freshman, first-year student. Instead of man-made, synthetic. Instead of penmanship, handwriting. Now, does handwritings have the same kind of feel as penmanship? I'm not sure, but again, I would encourage you all to challenge yourselves to speaking in a more inclusive way, and of course, using your best judgment along the way. Similarly, avoiding ethnocentrism or cultural bias, essentially disparaging any other kind of cultures or groups, or using any kind of a derogatory terms. And this might surprise people, but cursing can be, a common occurrence in class settings and professional settings. And I suppose there might be some appropriate reasons to throw in a curse word if it really accurately or just has some power and strength to it, and if it builds and adds to your message, or if you've prepared a certain quote or an ending to a story that includes a word like that, use your best judgment. But mindless, informal, casual overuse of, cursing or overly informal language can detract from your authoritativeness and your professionalism and your formality. So I'd strongly recommend against it generally. Next, it might surprise you to think about this. This is a public speaking class, but most of your time is going to be spent listening. In fact, outside of this class, virtually all of your time is spent listening. We do far more listening than we do talking. Think about any kind of a class. Even if you're talking a lot of the time and there's 30 other students in class and a teacher, you're probably going to be listening 99% of the time, if not more. So it might benefit you to learn to listen better or to consider carefully how your listening skills stack up. And I've got a quote here from Diogenes. We have 2 ears and 1 tongue so that we would listen more and talk less. There are some similar, historical ancient quotes that speak to the importance of listening. I think somewhere in the New Testament there's a line about being slow to anger, quick to listen. I'm leaving some out there. It escapes me at this moment. In I believe the Tao Te Ching, the ancient Chinese philosophical text, there's a line, and I'm paraphrasing here, that those who talk a lot don't really know a lot. Those who know a lot don't really talk a lot. So it might be more valuable to listen carefully in some cases than to speak effectively. This is ironic in a public speaking class. That's why I think it's so interesting and relevant. There's a difference, of course, between hearing and listening. Hearing sounds versus listening and interpreting that information. We might have lots of listening distractions. In the virtual setting, we might have, actual sound quality issues. There might be, street noise or noise next door, etc., that gets in the way. There can be internal distractions, so mental distractions if we have something else on our mind. That can also play a role and get in the way of communication or disrupt the message in some way. So let's consider what makes a strong listener, an active listener. Well, summarizing what's being said, that's why I have you all take notes on the presentations, because that helps us to listen more carefully. So summarize what's the speaker's message? What's their main point? Are they moving from one main idea to the next idea? Critiquing. So do you agree or disagree with what's being shared? What questions would you have for the speaker? Even if you don't directly ask the speaker, thinking of questions helps you engage and listen more deeply. And finally, nonverbal feedback, like nodding our head, etc., can be important. And to build on that, we have an acronym that helps us remember some important nonverbal feedback. This actually comes from the field of counseling and psychology. We have the SOLAR acronym, where number one, we face the speaker. So in this case, I'm trying to face the camera, the computer screen, but in many cases in audience, you wouldn't want to be turning your back or your side to the speaker or etc. Having open posture as opposed to being closed off. Sitting up straight, leaning in, providing eye contact, which is going to be tricky now because we're looking directly into the camera. And finally, having a relaxed expression. These are ways that we can encourage a speaker to deliver their message more effectively, to feel more welcomed by the audience. And that's why sometimes you go into an environment that feels hostile if everybody's closed off, not making eye contact, not facing you, having a tense expression on their face. That would be the opposite of a receptive, welcoming audience. So we want to be welcoming the speaker in this class. Well, that just about concludes this lesson, but I want to end with some questions. So let's see if you can think, so you can just kind of follow along with me here. Thinking back to the role of feedback. Do you remember what that's about? That's the audience's response. So you have the source, the receiver, and then the source, the message, the receiver, and then feedback. So there's a loop where the speaker gets some feedback from the audience in a live communication setting. Who said there's two speakers, those that are nervous and those that are liars? The famous Mark Twain. And the parasympathetic nervous system activates symptoms of anxiety. True or false? False. What's the method to promote inclusivity and to have a more expansive, open-minded message? One way is by using gender-neutral terms like police officer instead of policeman. Finally, solar square. Openness, leaning up, leaning in, sitting up straight, eye contact, and a relaxed expression. So now that we know a little bit about the basics behind communication principles and some of the first few chapters, I want you to think about what makes a really strong communicator. If you think about the best speaker that you can imagine, or a person in your life or in media or in any kind of a format that you feel like is a really strong communicator and is really good at expressing their ideas, really memorable, influential, I want you to start thinking about and start noticing what makes them that way. What specifically is it? Their gestures, their posture, their demeanor, and their ideas. And by just becoming more keen at observing those factors, we can start incorporating that into our own speech and into our own communication, and thus become more effective speakers ourselves. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.